This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's October 4th, 2024. On this day in 1582, the Western world braced itself for a massive scheduling nightmare. On the order of the Pope, the next 10 days on the calendar were simply skipped in Catholic countries. Didn't exist. October 4th was followed immediately by October 15th. It had to have played a lot of games with people's heads, and this at a time when so much of society kept track of most things mentally. But the reason why was a big one. It was the switch from the Julian calendar, developed and codified during the Roman Empire, to the Gregorian calendar, which is what we all use to this day. The problem was that the Julian calendar was just a little longer than the time it took for the Earth to circle the sun, and over centuries, that added up. It had become very difficult to calculate the dates for Easter, which threw off a major chunk of the liturgical calendar, and in most of Europe, even non-religious activities were scheduled with the Catholic Church's seasons and feast days in mind. To complicate matters further, Protestant nations did not make the change right away. So this day was actually the last one for a while when all of Europe agreed on what day of the year it was. It would be more than 150 years before Great Britain and its American territories came into line with that big switch. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Well, if the latest news is any indication, the schedule of criminal trials in Nashville could get very complicated very soon. Last week, the state comptroller dropped the bombshell investigative report detailing allegations of extensive surveillance in the district attorney's office. I talked about it on Monday's episode of this podcast, about how the state officials believe DA Glenn Funk broke the law by collecting information that could give his team an unfair advantage in court, but also about how the state attorney general doesn't think there's clear enough evidence to prosecute Funk. The comptroller would like to see a special prosecutor to take the case on instead. Basically, initial conversation about the findings was really centered on what should happen to Funk, and that's going to continue to be very important. But the other piece is figuring out what happens to the court cases that Funk's office handles. This week, a major murder trial was put on hold as a direct result of the eavesdropping. The way that's playing out directly challenges the point that Funk has repeatedly made, that in his opinion, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in a DA's office. And it also highlights why setting up surveillance on his own home turf could give the prosecutor an advantage. The murder trial in question is for Calvin Atchison. He's accused of killing Velma Tharp in an alley in 2000. You may remember this case from the name of another man, Paul Garrett, who was in the news quite a bit for a while. Garrett was initially convicted of the crime, wrongfully convicted. Garrett served 10 years in prison before he was exonerated. Last year, he received more than $1 million in a settlement. Garrett's innocence was established after DNA evidence from the scene was matched to Calvin Atchison. As DA, Glenn Funk championed the process meant to set things right amid all kinds of accusations that his predecessor's office had totally bungled the case. After years of turmoil, Atchison's trial was finally scheduled to start next week. But now it won't. Atchison's attorneys say the only way they could access the prosecution's evidence was to go to a specific room at the DA's office and view it there. They did spot a video camera, but from what they could tell, it didn't have a microphone. Since that was the only place where they could see the evidence, and because they thought they'd done their due diligence to make sure they had privacy, the defense lawyers discussed the evidence as they viewed it. They talked about their plans for responding to it. Now they say they've been told there was a separate audio recording device in the room. Everything they said in that room was available for the prosecutors to hear and use when crafting their own legal strategy. The defense filed a motion asking for the case to be reassigned to different prosecutors. The judge hasn't ruled on the motion, but the trial was put on indefinite delay. All of this is just in one case. How many other attorneys are going to find out the same thing about being surveilled and then ask for new prosecution teams in the coming weeks? And what about the ones that have already been through the system? How many convictions will be appealed now? The Public Defender's Office has asked for a full list of cases in which surveillance recordings were made. According to investigators, the recording equipment was set up sometime in either 2020 or 2021, so potentially there are 3 or maybe even 4 years of recordings that could throw cases into question. And everyone that gets delayed or reconsidered creates the possibility of a backlog that could delay justice in Nashville's future criminal cases. In just a few minutes, a Nashville group helping a more diverse pool of artists find their place in the country music scene. That's coming up after the newscast.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Miriam Yao, and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. A jury has returned a mixed verdict in the federal trial of former Memphis police officers who fatally beat Tyree Nichols last year. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Tadarius Bean, Demetrius Haley, and Justin Smith guilty of witness tampering. That charge could carry a sentence of up to 20 years in prison. Haley was also found guilty of violating Nichols' civil rights by causing bodily injury. That could add up to 10 additional years. But the group was found not guilty of the most serious charge, violating Nichols' civil rights causing death. 2 other former officers pleaded guilty to all of the charges and testified against the 3 on trial. All 5 also face separate state charges of second-degree murder. That trial has not yet been scheduled. The U.S. Justice Department is conducting an investigation into the way Memphis police use force and conduct arrests. Nichols' mother has filed a $550 million lawsuit against the city of Memphis and its police chief. President Joe Biden has approved a major emergency declaration for part of East Tennessee in response to Hurricane Helene. During a visit to the Greene County Emergency Operations Center, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee said that means financial assistance for people affected by the storm.
So that disaster declaration allows for reimbursement from the federal government for expenses that people make in their in the aftermath.
Tennesseans can apply to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, for help paying for home repairs, food or diapers, medical care, or other expenses they incurred because of the storm. The Tennessee Department of Labor says people who lost work because of the hurricane can apply on its website for financial assistance as well. East Tennessee counties are still in the early phases of recovery. The Knoxville News-Sentinel reports each county is facing different challenges. Carter County lost its largest high school in the flood. County officials are working on a plan for where to send students when schools resume after fall break on October 14th. Greene County's water treatment plant was knocked out. Residents are still relying on bottled water. They can pick up to 20 gallons per day at several locations around the county. Meanwhile, Cott County and part of Carter County's water systems are up and running, but those areas are under a boil order. 6 more people are now indicted amid the ongoing investigation into drug smuggling in a Nashville jail. It's the 3rd round of charges stemming from the probe. This time they include a former employee of the downtown detention center. The Tennessean reports that worker is accused of bringing drugs into the facility and passing them on to people being held there. Another 2 of the indictments are for people outside the jail who prosecutors say helped pass logistical information about payments and the movement of drugs behind bars. Police say all 6 have either been arrested or were already in custody. 2 mass shootings occur on average every day in the United States. To help people better prepare, the Franklin Police Department is hosting a series of active shooter trainings. Demand is very high, says spokesperson Mack. So Franklin PD has added more seminars, but as of now, all the scheduled trainings are full.
It's top of mind right now for a lot of people in light of it just seems like in this country on a weekly basis that we are dealing with another tragic situation involving a mass shooting.
When it says it isn't a self-defense or tactical training.
You're not going to learn anything about weapons in this class. Weapons are off limits. We don't want people bringing weapons to this class.
When it says the training is strictly a lecture on how to prepare your business or your congregation in case a tragedy unfolds. One of Nashville's great stories is getting the operatic treatment. Next week, the Seattle Opera will stage the world premiere of Jubilee, based on the true story of the singing group from Fisk University that toured internationally in the 1870s. The Jubilee singers were born into slavery. They toured to raise money for a permanent campus for the HBCU. That tour was incredibly successful, eventually extending all the way to Europe. And along the way, they introduced the wider world to the spiritual music that developed within enslaved communities. The new opera incorporates more than 40 of those spirituals and depicts the personal histories of the individuals who formed the first iteration of the choir. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Over the last several years, numerous articles, panel discussions, and documentaries have focused on country music's marginalized voices and called for greater diversity in the genre. In 2022, the Equal Access Professional Development Program set out to do something about it. Senior music writer Julie Height looks into the impact it's had so far.
Not just anyone can land a meeting with one of the largest publishers on Music Row, Warner Chappell. But on an August afternoon, Equal Access participants joined the company's CEO and other staff in a lounge furnished with suede couches. It's Tiffany Provenzano's job to arrange these networking events.
Equal Access is a program that seeks to lift up underrepresented voices in country music. So we're trying to change who you see on the stage, but also who you see behind the scenes.
On stage with guitars in their laps are country singer Valerie Ponzio, who's Latina, indie folk-leaning Julie Williams, who's black and queer, and country pop artist Chris Hausman, who's gay. Provenzano doesn't just list off their names, she spells out their individual accomplishments, making the case that they're singer-songwriters worth paying attention to. Hausman does a song from his new album, Blue Neck.
I'll just say that this song is a very true story inspired by an ex-boyfriend of mine, and the song's called The Dog. I don't miss those fights at midnight or sleeping on the couch.
At the end, Provenzano thanks their hosts and makes a final request.
I hope that you guys will stay and mix and mingle with some of the folks here. Part of our whole program is just making sure they meet more folks in the industry that are interested in helping. So, shameless plug, none of them have publishing deals, but also...
Hausman's been performing most of his life, but having anyone advocate for his talent is new.
As somebody who's coming up on 16 years in Nashville, I just can't even imagine what things would have looked like if things like the Equal Access program would have been around when I got here in 2008, fresh off the openly gay train.
In his early days in town, just being who he was meant he didn't have a chance in country music, so he put his ambitions on hold. Equal Access started in 2022. Its founder, Cameo Carlson, built her career in other cities and sectors of the music industry before moving to Nashville.
And when I got here, it just struck me going into meetings that everybody was the same, and it was much more male on the senior level.
She eventually became CEO of a company called M Theory, while also helping launch DEI committees in Nashville.
I was on these committees, and there's work being done, and it's hard work. It's all very important. But I needed to be able to do something with my direct resources and our company, and that was really the impetus behind it.
Carlson used her industry connections to secure more funding from CMT, set up meetings at record labels, publishing companies, and streaming services, and fill out the first cohort with 6 artists and managers. She promised them compensation for their labor.
I am 100% asking you to go into straight white rooms and help us knock some doors down. Everybody from that first cohort was really into the idea and really willing to do that. And I'm so grateful because it's not their job. to do the educating on this.
Kadeem Phillips was one of a few executives who joined the first cohort with a track record of rap, R&B, or gospel hits, and who knew that didn't mean much in this industry.
You know, we have all this success, and then when we got in country, it's like everybody told us, no, y'all don't have anything. Y'all haven't done anything.
But in the program, Phillips felt like he was finally taken seriously.
Because these are doors we've been knocking at, nobody was answering. But Cameo was like, yeah, y'all gonna talk to them, you know? And then once they talked to us, they was like, okay, we should have been doing this. Equal Access gave us an opportunity to show people ourselves.
Phillips got help expanding his businesses and added a country duo to his management roster. Madeline Edwards, also part of the first Equal Access group, signed a record deal, while Charlene Bryant earned a senior VP role at a country label. That means that Equal Access participants now get to go to Bryant's office for a meeting. Word is out about the program. Each cycle, more people apply, and while they're not guaranteed contracts or clients, they can count on gaining access where before they encountered barriers. What Chris Hausman needed most when he joined the third Equal Access cohort this spring was help with the logistics of releasing his newly completed album.
But the timing couldn't have been better because they just were like, all right, put me in, let's do this, and let's check all these things that I would have had no idea about.
Knowledge about how things work, that's access too. For Nashville Public Radio, I'm Julie Height.
Baby, I'm helpless. I can only resist for so long. I gave it my best, but this halo don't fit. If I had to spend forever in heaven without you, might as well be in hell. My verdict is in, 'cause baby, if loving you is wrong, then I'm guilty as sin.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. If that app has a thumbs up or review option, give us a little love. It really helps more people hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up next week.